Millionaire went to evict a tenant, but his daughter offered her only doll. Richard Coleman strode firmly down the hallway of the residential building he had purchased 2 months ago, his footsteps echoing against the cold ceramic floor. Over the past 3 years, since his construction company had skyrocketed in New York City's real estate market, he had grown accustomed to solving problems directly and without sentimentality. He stopped in front of apartment 204, where the tenant, who was 3 months behind on rent, lived. The eviction paperwork was in his hands, signed and stamped. There was no more time for talk or empty promises. He knocked forcefully on the door, prepared for yet another unpleasant situation that came with his business. "Mr. Robert?" "Open." "The door, please. It's Richard Coleman, the property owner." The silence lingered for a few seconds before he heard slow footsteps approaching. The door opened to reveal a tired-looking man in his 40s, unshaven and dressed in simple clothes. Robert Miller's eyes were red, as if he had been crying recently. "Good afternoon, Mr. Richard. I figured you'd come today." "Then you already know why I'm here." 3 months, Robert. 3 months without a single penny in rent. I can't wait any longer." Robert lowered his head, his hands trembling slightly as he held the doorknob. Richard had always prided himself on keeping his cool in business. But there was something about this man's expression that unsettled him. Maybe it was the exhaustion or the way his shoulders seemed to carry an invisible weight. "Mr. Richard, I know I have no excuses. I lost my job at the factory 4 months ago, and since then..." Robert swallowed hard. "It's been really tough. I tried finding other work, but with the crisis..." "Listen, Robert, I understand your situation, but I have bills to pay. This building has a bank loan, employees to cover. I can't keep losing money indefinitely." Just then, a child's voice rang out from inside the apartment, sweet and melodic like a bell. "Daddy? Who's there?" Richard saw Robert turn quickly, trying to hide the desperation on his face. A small child appeared behind him, her curly blonde hair framing an angelic little face. She couldn't have been more than 3 years old, wearing a simple but clean pink dress, clutching a worn-out doll in her arms. "It's just a friend of Daddy's, sweetheart. Go back inside, okay?" But the girl, with the curiosity typical of her age, took a few steps toward the door, her big, bright blue eyes fixed on Richard with genuine curiosity. "Hi," she said, smiling and lifting the doll. "This is Lucy, my little girl. She's sick today." Richard felt something strange in his chest. Maybe it was the contrast between the child's innocence and the harshness of the situation. Or maybe it was the way she spoke about the doll, as if it were a real being in need of care. "Emily, honey, please go back inside." Robert tried again, his voice tenser. "But Daddy," the man looked sad. "Like you sometimes do." The child's words cut through the air like a blade. Richard found himself peering more closely into the apartment through the half-open door. He could see the furniture was sparse and old, but everything was neatly arranged. There were no signs of neglect or irresponsibility, just a family going through real hardship. "Mr. Richard," Robert spoke again, his voice quieter. "I know you have every right to evict us. I just wanted to ask for 1 more week. I got an interview for a night security job. If I get it, I can at least start paying something." Richard looked down at the paperwork in his hands. It was an eviction for non-payment, plain and simple. He had done this dozens of times over the past few years. It was part of the business, and he had always managed to maintain the necessary emotional distance. "A week won't solve 3 months of late payments, Robert." I know, but it's just..." Robert glanced at his daughter, who was still watching the conversation with interest. "Emily, go play in your room, okay? Daddy needs to talk to Mr. Richard." The little girl nodded, but before walking away, she did something that caught Richard completely off guard. She stepped closer to him, holding out a worn-out doll. "Mister, do you want to play with Lucy? When I'm sad, she always makes me feel better." The gesture was so unexpected and pure that Richard froze for a few seconds, unsure how to react. The doll was clearly old, with frayed hair and a few stains on its dress, but it was clean and well cared for. It was obvious this was the child's most treasured toy. "Emily, you don't have to..." Robert began, clearly embarrassed. "But Daddy, his face looks just like yours when you're worried. Lucy always helps." Richard crouched down to the little girl's level. For the first time in years, he felt a crack in his emotional armor. There was something about the sincerity of her offer that touched him in a way he couldn't explain. "That's very kind of you, Emily. What's your little girl's full name?" "Lucy Doll Miller," she replied proudly. "She's 3 years old, just like me, and she loves cuddles and bedtime stories." Robert watched the interaction with a mix of pride and apprehension. It was clear he had raised his daughter with great love, even in the midst of hardship. The girl was polite, affectionate, and had the kind of spontaneity only children possess. "You take very good care of her," Richard said carefully, handing the doll back to her small hands. "Well, she doesn't have a mommy anymore, right, Daddy? So I have to take extra good care of her." The innocent comment made Robert close his eyes for a moment, as if holding back deep pain. Richard realized there was far more to this situation than he had first thought. "Emily, go play in your room now, please," Robert asked again, this time more firmly. The girl obeyed, but not before waving at Richard and whispering something to the doll as if explaining who the visitor was. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. When they were alone, Robert let out a deep sigh before speaking. "Mr. Richard, I know you must think I'm just another deadbeat trying to buy time. But the truth is," he paused as if deciding how much to reveal, "Emily's mother passed away a year and a half ago. Cancer. Months of treatment, hospitals, expensive medication. I sold everything of value to try and save her." Richard felt the weight of that revelation. He was beginning to understand why Robert seemed to carry the world on his shoulders. "When she was gone, I was left with a mountain of hospital debt and a little girl to raise alone. I kept my job at the factory for a few more months, but after the pandemic, the mass layoffs started. I was one of the last to go, but why didn't you tell me this before?" Richard asked, genuinely curious. "Because you bought the building 2 months ago, and I was already 2 months behind then. I thought if I could at least start paying something, it would show good faith. But it's been impossible to find work. Who's going to hire a 40-year-old man with an incomplete high school education in the middle of an economic crisis?" Richard studied Robert more carefully. The man wasn't lying. There was a painful sincerity in his words, and there was something else, a dignity that remained intact despite all the hardships. "And your family? Isn't there anyone who can help?" "My parents passed away when I was young. From my wife's family, only her sister is left, but she lives in rural Kentucky and can barely support her own children. I can't ask her to take care of us." The silence stretched between them for a few moments. Richard could hear the little girl's voice coming from the bedroom, chatting excitedly with her doll. It was a sound that contrasted sharply with the heaviness of the conversation he was having with her father. "Robert, I understand your situation, but you need to understand mine too. I own 15 apartments in this building. If I start making exceptions, setting precedents—" "I know, Mr. Richard. I understand perfectly. I'm just asking for a chance, an opportunity to prove I can honor my commitments." Richard looked again at the papers in his hands. The eviction was all in order, legal, justified, but something inside him resisted simply handing over the documents and walking away. "Tell me more about this job interview." "It's for a night security position at a logistics company. The pay isn't much, but it would be enough to start paying rent and still have something left for Emily's basic needs. The interview is next Thursday." "And who'll take care of the girl if you work nights?" Robert hesitated before answering. "Mrs. Martha, the neighbor in 203, offered to help. She's retired and has a soft spot for Emily. She said she can sleep here with her on the nights I'm working." Richard knew Martha Johnson, a 65-year-old widow who had lived in the building even before he bought it. She was a punctual tenant who had never caused any trouble. The fact that she was willing to help Robert said something about his character. "Mr. Richard," Robert continued, his voice heavy with restrained emotion, "I know I have no right to ask for anything. I know I've already tested your patience, but my daughter is all I have left in this world, so I can't let her go without or lose the only home she's ever known." At that moment, Emily reappeared in the bedroom doorway, carrying not just her doll, but also a crayon drawing. "Daddy, I made a picture for Mr. Richard, he automatically supplied. Mr. Richard, she corrected, smiling. I made a picture of our family. Look, she held out the paper, and Richard saw a typical child's drawing. 3 stick figures under a yellow sun, a tall one for the father, a smaller one for her, and a tiny one that was clearly the doll. And here, she pointed to a corner of the paper, is Mommy in heaven watching over us. The drawing was touching in its simplicity. Richard realized the little girl had found a way to keep her mother present in her life, even after her passing. It was a surprisingly mature coping mechanism for such a young child. It's a very beautiful drawing, Emily. May I keep it? The girl's eyes lit up. You can, but you have to promise to take good care of it, okay? And if you feel sad, you can look at it and remember there are people who care about you. Robert watched the scene with a mix of pride and worry. It was clear he was trying to shield his daughter from the reality of their financial situation, but it was also evident that the girl sensed the tension, even if she didn't fully understand. Richard carefully folded the drawing and tucked it into his jacket's inner pocket. That simple gesture seemed to mean a lot to the child, who clapped her hands in delight. Emily, how about you and Lucy go play for a bit while your dad and I finished talking. Okay, come on, Lucy, let's have tea with the other dolls. She skipped away again, leaving the 2 men alone. Richard realized he was dealing with far more than a simple matter of overdue rent. He was facing a family struggling to stay together amidst devastating circumstances. Robert, I need to be honest with you. From a business standpoint, I should proceed with this eviction now and find a tenant who can pay on time. I understand, Mr. Richard. But, Richard continued, there's something about how you're handling this situation that impresses me. You're not trying to deceive me, and you're not making unnecessary drama. And your daughter, she's special. Robert nodded, unsure where Richard was going with this. I'm going to make you an offer, a one-time offer, something I've never done before and probably never will again. Robert's heart raced. If you get that job on Thursday, I'll freeze the current debt. 3 months of rent will be suspended for 6 months. You'll only start paying the current rent from January onward. Midway through next year, we'll reassess the previous debt. Robert's eyes widened in disbelief. But in return, I want your commitment that there will be no more late payments. 1 day late, and the deal is off. The full debt comes back into effect and the eviction proceeds immediately. Mr. Richard, I don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me yet. First, you need to get the job. Second, you need to prove you can hold up your end of the deal. Robert extended his hand, which trembled slightly as Richard shook it. You won't regret this, I promise. I hope not, Robert, because if you let me down, there won't be a second chance. Richard tucked the eviction papers into his jacket pocket, along with Emily's drawing. It was the first time in years he'd made a business decision based on emotion rather than pure logic, and it left him unsettled. One last thing, he said before leaving. I need you to keep our conversation confidential. I can't have other tenants finding out I made an exception. It would set a dangerous precedent for my business. Of course, Mr. Richard, you can trust me. As Richard turned to leave, he heard Emily's voice again from the bedroom. Daddy, did Mr. Richard leave already? I wanted to show him the song I can sing. He had to go, sweetheart. But maybe next time. Will he come back? Robert hesitated before answering. I hope so, honey, I hope so. Richard walked down the building stairs more slowly than when he'd arrived. His mind was torn between the satisfaction of helping a family in need and the worry that he'd made a decision that could hurt his business. When he reached his car, a black Mercedes parked on the street, he sat in the driver's seat for a few minutes, just staring at the building. He could see the window of apartment 204, where a small blonde figure occasionally appeared, likely playing near the glass. He pulled out the drawing and studied it again. 3 simple figures under a yellow sun, representing a family fighting to stay together. There was something deeply touching about how the child had included her late mother in the drawing, as if she was still a constant, protective presence. Richard started the car and drove back to his downtown office, but his mind kept returning to the conversation he'd just had. There was something about Robert Miller that had piqued his curiosity. The man wasn't like the usual delinquent tenants he dealt with. At the office, Richard called his assistant, Barbara, an efficient woman in her 50s who had worked with him for over a decade. "Barbara, I need you to run a discreet background check on a tenant. Robert Miller, apartment 204 in the building on Maple Street." "Any specific problem, Mr. Richard?" "Not exactly. I just want to understand his situation better. Check his employment history, previous references, anything that can give us a clearer picture of his character." "I'll take care of it right away." Barbara was known for her efficiency and discretion. If there was anything to uncover about Robert Miller, she would find it. In the following days, Richard often caught himself thinking about the family in apartment 204. It was unusual for him to get emotionally involved with his tenants' personal matters, but there was something about this situation that intrigued him. On Wednesday, Barbara brought him the report he had requested. "Mr. Richard, I found some interesting information about Robert Miller." "Tell me." "He worked at the same factory for 8 years, always with good evaluations. The former supervisors I managed to contact spoke of him as a dedicated and reliable employee. Never had disciplinary issues or excessive absences. And before the factory, he worked at an auto repair shop for 3 years. The owner retired and closed the business, but he said Robert was one of the best employees he ever had. Honest, hard-working, good with customers." Richard nodded, pleased with the information. "There's more. I spoke to a neighbor from the previous building where he lived with his wife. She said Robert cared for his wife throughout her illness, never let her go without anything, even if it meant working overtime or selling his own belongings." "Interesting. And what about his current financial situation?" "The medical bills are real and significant. He truly spent all his savings on his wife's treatment. The funeral was also a considerable expense for someone in his position. There's no sign of financial mismanagement or irresponsible spending." Richard was satisfied to learn his intuition about Robert was correct. The man wasn't a freeloader or irresponsible, just someone who had faced devastating circumstances and was struggling to get back on his feet. On Thursday evening, Richard found himself driving to the building on Maple Street. Officially, he was just doing a routine inspection, but he really wanted to know how Robert's job interview had gone. When he arrived, he found Mrs. Martha watering the plants in the small garden at the entrance. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Martha. How are you?" "Oh, Mr. Richard, so good to see you." "I'm well, thank you. Are you here for an inspection?" "Just a routine check. How are things around here?" "Peaceful, thank goodness. By the way, I'm glad you came. I wanted to thank you for your patience with Robert." Richard grew alert. Robert had promised to keep their arrangement confidential. "What do you mean, Mrs. Martha?" "Oh, he didn't. Give me details, but I could tell you didn't go through with, well, that unpleasant situation he was dealing with. Robert is a good man, Mr. Richard. He's been taking care of his little girl with so much love since he lost his wife." "I see. And how is he today?" "Excited. He had a job interview today, said it went well. Little Emily was so happy, telling everyone her daddy was getting a new job." Richard felt a twinge of satisfaction. It seemed his decision to give Robert a chance was proving to be the right one. "By the way," Mrs. Martha continued, "Emily was asking if you'd come back to see the new drawing she made. She seemed really taken with your visit." "She made another drawing?" "Yes, one of her whole happy family. She even included you in it, as a family friend. She's such a sweet child." Richard felt an odd emotion knowing he'd been included in the little girl's imaginary world. It was a new experience for him, someone who had always kept strictly professional relationships with his tenants. "Maybe I'll stop by to say hello later. I'm sure they'll be happy. Emily sits by the window every afternoon, waiting to see the handsome man in a suit walk down the street." Richard smiled involuntarily. How long had it been since he smiled over something so simple and genuine? Later, around 7 in the evening, Richard knocked on the door of apartment 204. This time he wasn't carrying eviction papers, just a genuine curiosity about how Robert's day had gone. "Mr. Richard." Robert opened the door with a smile he couldn't hide despite trying to stay composed. What a surprise. "Good evening, Robert. I hope I'm not disturbing you. I just wanted to know how the interview went." "Please, come in. Emily will be so happy to see you." The apartment had a different atmosphere from his first visit. There was a lighter energy, less heavy. Robert seemed more confident, less weighed down by worries. "Mr. Richard!" Emily came running, carrying her inseparable doll and a new drawing. "I knew you'd come back. Look what I made." She showed a drawing even more detailed than the first. This time there were 4 figures: Daddy, Emily, the doll Lucy, and a figure in a suit that clearly represented Richard. All of them were smiling under a colorful rainbow. "It's beautiful, Emily. You have real talent for drawing." "My daycare teacher said that too. And look, I put you here because you helped my daddy stop being sad." Richard glanced at Robert, who lowered his eyes, clearly embarrassed. "Emily, sweetheart, go play for a bit while I talk to Mr. Richard." "When—" The little girl walked away, Robert quickly explained. "Mr. Richard, I didn't tell her anything specific. She just noticed I was less worried after your visit. Kids pick up on mood changes, don't they?" "Of course, I understand. So how did the interview go?" Robert's face lit up. "I got it. I start Monday night, the night shift from 10 at night to 6 in the morning. The pay is $2,200 a month." Richard did the math in his head. It was enough to cover the $800 rent and still leave something for a small family's basic needs. It wouldn't be a life of luxury, but it would be decent. "Congratulations, Robert. I'm genuinely happy for you. Mr. Richard, I don't know how to express my gratitude. You gave me a chance when I needed it most. I promise I won't let you down." "I hope not. Remember, our agreement depends on strict payment starting in January." "Understood perfectly." Emily reappeared, this time holding a tiny plastic cup. "Mr. Richard, do you want to have tea with me and Lucy? I made a special pretend tea." Robert tried to intervene. "Emily, Mr. Richard must be busy." "Actually," Richard heard himself say to his own surprise, "I'd love to have tea with you." The next 20 minutes felt surreal to Richard. He found himself sitting on the floor of the modest living room, drinking tea from a pink plastic cup, while Emily explained in detail the rules of the game and formally introduced each of her dolls. "This is Lucy, who you already know. This is Molly, who loves to sleep a lot. And this is Dr. Sarah, who takes care of all the others when they get sick." "And why do you love playing with dolls so much, Emily?" "Because then I can be their mommy, just like my mommy was with me. Daddy said she's in heaven now, but she still watches over me from there. So I take care of my little girls here." The girl's answer touched Richard in an unexpected way. There was a wisdom and emotional maturity in her words that was remarkable for such a young child. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. When Richard finally said goodbye and left the apartment, he carried with him Emily's second drawing and a strange feeling in his chest. For the first time in years, he had spent time in a home where money wasn't the most important thing, where love and mutual care created an atmosphere of true richness. Over the weekend, Richard did something he never imagined he'd do. He went to the mall to buy a gift for Emily. After searching for a long time, he found a new doll, similar to Lucy, but in perfect condition. He also bought some doll clothes and a small toy cradle. On Monday, as Robert was leaving for his first day at his new job, he found a bag at the apartment door with the gifts and a note. "For Emily and her little daughters. Congratulations on the new job, Robert. R.C." Emily's reaction was pure joy. She hugged the new doll with as much affection as she did her worn-out Lucy and immediately introduced them to each other, creating an elaborate story about how they were sisters finally reunited. In the weeks that followed, an unusual routine settled in. Robert worked nights and slept part of the morning. Emily stayed at daycare during the day, and when she came home in the late afternoon, she often played in the building's common area, where she invariably ran into Mrs. Martha. Richard, who had never made a habit of visiting his properties without a specific reason, began showing up at the Maple Street building with a frequency even he found odd. He always made up some excuse, an inspection, checking for structural issues, talking to other tenants. In truth, he enjoyed watching Emily play in the garden, seeing how she cared for her dolls with maternal dedication, and listening to her made-up stories about the lives of her little daughters. There was a purity in that child's world that relaxed him in a way he couldn't explain. It was during one of these casual visits at the end of November that Richard noticed something was different. Emily was playing alone as usual, but she seemed quieter, less lively. When he approached to greet her, he saw her eyes were red. "Hi, Emily, is everything okay?" She looked up at him, forcing a small smile. "Hi, Mr. Richard, I'm fine," but it was obvious she wasn't. Richard crouched beside her. "Are you sure? You seem a little sad today." Emily hesitated for a moment, glancing at her dolls. "It's just... I miss Mommy. Today's the day she went up to heaven." Richard's heart clenched. It was the 1.5-year anniversary of Emily's mother's death. For a 3-year-old, that date likely brought up confusing emotions she couldn't fully process. "And where's your daddy?" "He's sleeping. He worked all night and is really tired. Mrs. Martha said, I can't wake him up." Richard understood the dilemma. Robert needed sleep so he could work again that night, but his daughter was going through an emotionally difficult moment without her father's presence. "You know what we can do? How about I stay here and play with you and your little daughters until your daddy wakes up?" Emily's eyes lit up instantly. "Really? Of course, but you'll have to teach me the rules properly. I'm still not very good at taking care of dolls." For the first time that day, Emily smiled genuinely. "Okay, first you have to choose which one will be your little daughter, but you have to promise to take good care of her, okay?" Richard spent the next hour learning about the complex world of Emily's dolls. He discovered that each one had a unique personality, specific needs, and elaborate stories created by the little girl's imagination. It was a rich and detailed universe that revealed not just creativity, but also the emotional needs of a child who had lost her mother too soon. "Mr. Richard," Emily said during a break in their playtime, "do you have little kids?" The question caught Richard off guard. At 42, he had never married or had children. He had always been too focused on business to seriously consider starting a family. "No, Emily, I don't have kids." "Why?" The simple, direct question left him speechless for a few seconds. How could he explain to a 3-year-old the reasons an adult might choose not to have a family? I guess I never found the right person to be the mommy of my kids." "Oh, but you like kids, right? Because you play with me and you're really nice." "I do, Emily. You taught me that." "What do you mean?" "Before I met you, I didn't know playing could be so much fun. You've taught me a lot of important things." Emily smiled proudly. "My mommy always said kids can teach grown-ups too. She was really smart." "Do you remember her?" "A little. I remember she smelled really nice and always stroked my hair before I went to sleep. And she used to sing a really pretty song." "What song?" Emily began humming a soft melody, likely a lullaby her mother used to sing. The sweet, melancholic sound of her child's voice created a moment of deep emotion. "It's really beautiful," Richard said, genuinely moved. "When I miss her, I sing it to my little girls, then they don't feel sad." In that moment, Richard realized he was witnessing something extraordinary. That little girl had turned, her pain into care, her longing into love to be shared. It was a lesson in resilience that many adults would take years to learn. Robert showed up around 5 in the afternoon, still sleepy but visibly worried. "Emily, where are you?" He stopped when he saw his daughter playing with Richard in the garden. "Mr. Richard, I'm sorry, I didn't know you were here. Emily, you shouldn't be bothering." "Daddy, Mr. Richard played with me all afternoon. He learned how to take care of the dolls, and he was really good." Robert looked at Richard with gratitude and confusion. "Mr. Richard, you didn't have to... thank you, but..." "Robert, it was a pleasure. Emily taught me a lot today." "Daddy, today is Mommy's day, right? Mr. Richard helped me. To not feel too sad." Robert swallowed hard, clearly emotional. "Yes, sweetheart, it's the day we remember Mommy, but we remember her with love, not sadness." "I know. Mr. Richard said Mommy is happy when we're happy too." Robert looked at Richard with surprise and gratitude. It was exactly the kind of conversation he wished he could have had with his daughter, but he'd been asleep when she needed him most. "Mr. Richard," Robert said quietly, "I don't know how to thank you. Today is a hard day for both of us, and you..." No need to thank me, Robert. It was educational for me too. That night, driving back to his luxurious apartment in the Upper East Side, Richard reflected on how he'd spent the afternoon. For the first time in years, he hadn't thought about business, money, or administrative problems. He had simply existed in the present moment, playing with a child and learning about her imaginary world. It was an experience he never thought he could have, or even want. And to his surprise, he had deeply enjoyed it. In the days that followed, Richard often found himself thinking about Emily and Robert. How was the adjustment to the new job going? How was Emily handling her father's nighttime absences? Was Mrs. Martha managing to help adequately? It felt strange for him to worry about people who were technically just tenants. But there was something about that family that had touched a part of himself he didn't even know existed. At the beginning of December, Richard made a decision that surprised even himself. He decided to organize a small Christmas party for the residents of the building on Maple Street. Officially, it would be an event to promote interaction among the tenants and strengthen the sense of community. But deep down, he wanted to create an opportunity for Emily to have a special Christmas. He discussed the idea with Mrs. Martha, and she was thrilled. "What a wonderful idea, Mr. Richard. It's been years since the tenants have gathered for anything. It'll be so good for everyone, especially the children. Do you think the other tenants will go along with it?" "I'm sure they will. Most of them are hard-working, down-to-earth people. A little get-together will be very welcome, especially after such a difficult year for everyone." "What about Robert and Emily? Do you think they'd feel comfortable joining?" "Oh, absolutely. Emily will be over the moon. She loves parties and meeting new people. And Robert could use some socializing too. Ever since his wife passed, he's closed himself off." Richard began planning the party with a dedication that surprised even his own team. He hired a small event company to handle the decorations, a simple but thoughtful buffet, and even a children's entertainer dressed as Santa Claus. When the invitations were distributed to the apartments, the reaction was one of genuine delight. Many of the residents were simple folks who rarely had the chance to attend social events, and the prospect of a party hosted by the building's owner left them excited and grateful. Emily, as expected, was absolutely ecstatic. Daddy, Mr. Richard is throwing a Christmas party for everyone, and there's going to be a real Santa." Robert, however, seemed a little uneasy. "Sweetheart, parties are great, but we can't afford gifts for everyone." "Daddy, we don't have to bring presents. Mr. Richard said it's just for fun." But Robert still worried. He understood Richard was being generous by organizing the party, but he felt awkward about not being able to contribute financially or return the favor in some way. It was Mrs. Martha who reassured him. "Robert, my dear, accept Mr. Richard's kindness with gratitude, not guilt. Sometimes people do nice things simply because they want to, not because they expect anything in return. But I feel bad, always being on the receiving end. You're working, paying your bills, taking good care of your daughter. That's already a lot. And who knows, maybe one day you'll be able to give back in your own way. Life has a way of coming full circle." The party was scheduled for the Saturday before Christmas. Richard spent the whole week more anxious than he usually was before important business meetings. He wanted everything to be perfect, especially for Emily. On the day of the party, he arrived at the building 2 hours early to oversee the final preparations. The ground floor event space, which was rarely used, had been transformed into a cozy Christmas setting with colorful lights, a small Christmas tree, and tables decorated with red and gold linens. The tenants started arriving around 3 in the afternoon. Richard was surprised to see how different everyone seemed when they weren't dealing with rent issues or building complaints. They were real families with their own stories, dreams, and struggles. There was the retired couple from apartment 101 who mentioned they hadn't been to a party in over 5 years. The large family from apartment 302 with 4 young children who were thrilled by the decorations. The single young man from 205 who worked as a delivery driver for an app and rarely had time to socialize. But it was the arrival of Robert and Emily that moved Richard the most. The little girl wore a red dress that had clearly been bought specially for the occasion, and she carried her doll Lucy, also dressed for the party with a ribbon in her hair. "Mr. Richard." She ran toward him as soon as she entered the hall. "Everything is so beautiful. It's just like the Christmas movies I watch on TV. You're the one who looks beautiful, Emily. That dress is lovely on you. Daddy bought it. For me, he said a party is a serious thing and that I had to dress nicely. Richard looked at Robert, who was clearly proud of his daughter, but also visibly uncomfortable being at a social gathering after so much time in isolation. Robert, I'm glad you came. Thank you for the invitation, Mr. Richard. Emily hasn't stopped talking about the party for a week. I don't think she slept much from all the excitement. The party went even better than Richard had imagined. The residents, shy at first, soon loosened up and began talking among themselves, discovering they had more in common than they'd thought. The children played together, the adults shared stories, and a genuine sense of community began to form. The most touching moment was when Santa arrived. All the children were thrilled, but Emily had a special reaction. She approached the character with almost religious reverence and whispered something in his ear that made the actor, a seasoned professional, visibly emotional. Later, Richard found out what she had said. Santa, I don't want a present for myself. I just want you to take care of my daddy so he won't be sad. And if you can, could you tell my mommy in heaven that I'm being a very good girl? The little girl's simple, selfless request moved everyone who heard it. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Richard stepped away for a moment, pretending to check something in the kitchen, but he really needed time to process the emotions he was feeling. He, who had always prided himself on his business-like detachment, was deeply affected by a 3-year-old child. When the party ended around 8 in the evening, Richard helped with the cleanup and said goodbye to the residents. Many thanked him warmly, saying it had been the best Christmas they'd had in years. Robert was one of the last to leave, carrying Emily, who had fallen asleep in his arms during the last hour of the party. Mr. Richard, he said softly, so as not to wake. His daughter, I don't have the words to thank you. It's been over 2 years since I've seen my little girl this happy. It was my pleasure, Robert. You could see how much she enjoyed herself. You gave her something I couldn't, the feeling that there's still magic in the world. After her mother passed, I was so focused on survival that I forgot how important it is to create special moments. You're doing an amazing job as a father, Robert. Emily is a special child because you're raising her with so much love. Sometimes love isn't enough. You need stability, security, resources, things I'm still trying to rebuild. With time and persistence, you'll get there, I'm sure of it. Robert smiled, but Richard could tell there was something else he wanted to say. Mr. Richard, can I ask you a personal question? Of course. Why are you doing all this for us? Not that I'm ungrateful, but it's so much more than any landlord would do for tenants. The question caught Richard off guard. He didn't even have a clear answer himself. I think you all reminded me of something I had forgotten. The importance of real human connections. What do you mean? Richard hesitated for a moment before answering. I spend my whole life dealing with numbers, contracts, financial reports. It's easy to forget that behind every apartment I rent, there are real people, with real stories, real dreams, and real struggles. You reminded me of that. And did that change anything for you? It changed everything, Robert. It completely changed how I see my business and my life. That night, Richard returned home with a sense of fulfillment he hadn't felt in years. For the first time, he had used his resources not just to make more money, but to create genuine happiness for others. It was an addictive feeling. In the few days after Christmas, Richard implemented a series of changes in his company. He instructed his team to be more flexible with tenants going through temporary hardships. He set up a fund for exceptional cases, allowing him to help families in critical situations without harming his business. It wasn't disorganized charity, it was business with a social conscience. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. But the biggest change was in his relationship with the Miller family. Richard began visiting them often, always with some plausible excuse, but in truth, because he genuinely enjoyed Emily's company and his conversations with Robert. Emily, with the natural ease of children, started treating him like part of the extended family. She told him about her adventures at daycare, showed him her new drawings and asked for advice on caring for her dolls. To her, Richard had become Uncle Richard, a constant and kind presence in her life. Robert, initially wary of getting so close to his landlord, gradually relaxed and began seeing Richard as a true friend. They talked about work, the challenges of raising a daughter alone, and plans for the future. It was during one of these conversations, at the end of January, that Robert revealed something that surprised Richard. "Mr. Richard, I need to tell you something I found out about you." "What is it?" "Remember the logistics company where I got my job?" "Of course." "Well, last month, while talking to other employees, I found out the owner is well known in the business world. And I also learned he has a lot of respect for a real estate businessman, someone who, according to him, has always been ethical in his dealings, even when it cost him money." Richard was intrigued. "And who would that businessman be?" "You, Mr. Richard. My boss said he's had several opportunities to do business with you and has always been impressed by your honesty. He said it's rare to find someone at your level who puts principles above profit." Richard was surprised. He had always tried to maintain ethical standards in his business, but he didn't know it was noticed or talked about by other businessmen. "Interesting. What else did your boss say?" "That he's curious to meet you in person. He said businessmen like you are rare and he'd like to exchange ideas about responsible business." "What's his name?" "Charles Wilson. The company is called American Logistics." Richard knew the company by name. It was a mid-sized operation, but had a good reputation in the market. The possibility of a business partnership had emerged organically from his decision to help Robert. "You know, it would be interesting to meet him. Maybe we can arrange something. Mr. Richard, can I suggest something? Why don't you come by the company one of these days? That way you can see where I work and meet Mr. Charles at the same time." The suggestion made sense. Richard decided he would visit the company the following week. American Logistics operated out of a large warehouse on the east side of New York City. When Richard arrived, he was greeted by Charles Wilson, a 50-year-old man with a simple appearance but an intelligent gaze. "Mr. Richard Coleman, what an honor to have you here. Robert told me you'd like to see our operation." "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Charles. Robert speaks very highly of the company and how well he's been treated here. Our Robert is an excellent employee. Punctual, responsible, dedicated. Workers like him are hard to come by." As Charles showed him around the facilities, Richard was impressed by the organization and efficiency of the operation. It was a family-run business, managed with seriousness and attention to detail. "Mr. Charles, may I ask about your expansion plans?" "Of course. In fact, we're considering opening a new distribution center. The market is growing and we're at full capacity." "And what's the main obstacle?" "Finding the right property. We need a large, well-located warehouse at a fair price. I've looked at several options, but either the price is unrealistic, the location isn't suitable, or the condition of the property is poor." Richard smiled. He had exactly what Charles was looking for. "By any chance, are you familiar with the Brooklyn area? I have a warehouse there that might interest you." Charles's eyes lit up. "I know it well. It's an excellent location for logistics. Can you tell me more about the property?" For the next hour, Richard and Charles discussed the details of the warehouse. It was a property Richard had acquired 2 years earlier, but had remained empty because he hadn't found the right tenant. Charles seemed very interested, and they scheduled a visit for the following week. When Robert learned that his employer and his landlord were negotiating a business partnership, he grew concerned. "Mr. Richard, I hope my situation doesn't interfere with your business. I wouldn't want my personal problems to get in the way." "Robert, relax. Your personal problems were never an issue. And as for business, it should be based on merit, not personal favors. If things work out with Mr. Charles, it'll be because it's good for both sides. Still, I worry about mixing things up. The only thing you've mixed is honesty with competence. That's always a good combination." The visit to the warehouse was a success. Charles was enthusiastic about the property and the terms Richard offered. They signed a 5-year contract with fair terms for both parties. "Mr. Richard," Charles said during the signing, "this partnership is more than just a lease. I have a feeling we'll do great business together in the future." "I hope so, Charles. It's always good to work with people who share the same values. By the way, how did you meet Robert? He mentioned you were instrumental in helping him rebuild after the tragedy he went through. Richard gave a brief version of the story, omitting the more personal details but explaining how he had chosen to give Robert a chance instead of simply evicting the family. Impressive, Charles remarked. You did what few would, and ended up discovering an excellent employee in the process. Yeah, sometimes the best deals start with the heart, not the head. Interesting philosophy. Mind if I borrow that line? Richard laughed. Feel free. I learned it recently from a very special teacher, a 3-year-old girl who taught me more about business than most of the books I've read in my life. Charles looked intrigued, but Richard didn't elaborate. Some lessons were too personal to share casually. The partnership with Charles bore fruit quickly. In the following months, he recommended Richard to other business owners, all interested in renting commercial properties. Richard's reputation as an ethical and reliable landlord spread through the business community, bringing new deals and opportunities. But what mattered most to Richard was seeing how Robert was growing in his job. Charles often praised his dedication and trustworthiness. Robert had been promoted to night supervisor and received a significant pay raise. Mr. Richard, Robert shared during one of their conversations, yesterday Mr. Charles called me into his office and said he's considering offering me a small stake in the company, a 5% share. That's fantastic, Robert. You absolutely deserve it. But it's a little scary too. I never imagined I'd ever be a partner in anything. I've always just been an employee. And what's worrying you? Fear of not measuring up, fear of disappointing Mr. Charles, fear of making the wrong decisions. Robert, you've already proven you're responsible, honest, and hardworking. Those are the most important qualities for any business. The rest comes with experience. Do you think I should accept? I think you should follow your heart. But remember, great opportunities always come with great responsibilities, and you've already shown you can handle responsibility. Robert decided to accept Charles's offer. The minority stake would give him a share of the profits and a voice in the company's strategic decisions. It was a unique opportunity for professional and financial growth. The news left Emily overjoyed, even if she didn't fully understand what it meant. Daddy, does this mean you'll be as rich as Mr. Richard? No, sweetheart. But it means our life will be more stable, and we can dream about things that once seemed impossible. Like what? Like our own house, like trips, like a better future for you. Emily clapped her hands in delight. And can we buy more dolls for my little girls? Robert laughed. Yes, we can buy more dolls. And can we invite Mr. Richard to dinner at our new house? Of course we can. The little girl ran to her room and came back with a new drawing. Look, Daddy, I drew our new family. Me, you, Mr. Richard, and all my little girls in a big house with a garden. Robert looked at the drawing with emotion. His daughter had naturally included Richard as part of the family without question. To her, he wasn't just the landlord anymore. He was an additional father figure, someone who had brought stability and warmth into their lives. That evening, when Richard came to visit them, as had become their routine, Emily showed him the drawing. Mr. Richard, look at our new family. When we get the big house, will you live near us? The innocent question touched Richard deeply. He realized that without planning it, he had become part of this family's life in a way he'd never imagined possible. Emily, wherever you live, I'll always be close. I promise. Even if it's far away. Even if it's far away. The little girl smiled, satisfied with his answer. Okay, now will you play dolls with me? Lucy wants to tell a new story. And so once again, Richard found himself sitting on the floor, immersed in Emily's imaginary world, learning about fatherhood, unconditional love, and the importance of the little things that truly matter in life. Months passed, and the Miller family's life continued to improve. Robert adjusted well to his new role as a minority partner in the company, showing a natural talent for management and decision-making. Emily grew a few inches taller, learned new words, and developed even more elaborate stories for her dolls. Richard, in turn, found himself changing not just in business, but also in his personal choices. He began turning down empty social commitments to spend more time with people who truly mattered to him. He cut back on weekend work hours to have more free time. For the first time in years, he was prioritizing quality of life over wealth accumulation. It was during one of these weekend afternoons, while playing with Emily in the small garden of their building, that a conversation changed everything. "Mr. Richard," said Emily, carefully arranging her dolls for an imaginary tea party, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart. What do you want to know? Why don't you have a family like ours?" The question, asked with the simplicity typical of children, caught Richard off guard. "What do you mean, Emily?" "I mean, why don't you have a wife and little kids? You're really nice, you take care of people, you play with me. Any kid would love to have you as a daddy." Richard felt a lump in his throat. How could he explain to a 3-year-old the choices he'd made in life? How could he say he'd always prioritized work over personal relationships? I guess I never found the right person, Emily." "But did you even look?" The innocent question cut like a knife. Richard realized he had never truly looked. He'd always assumed the right person would come along naturally, but he'd never made a conscious effort to build lasting relationships. "No, Emily, I guess I didn't look hard enough." "So why don't you look now? You can ask my daddy to help. He's really good at finding lost things." Robert, who had been watching the conversation from a distance, walked over with a smile. "What are you two talking about?" "Daddy, Mr. Richard needs to find a family. Can you help him?" Robert laughed, but sensed something serious behind his daughter's playful tone. "Emily, these things are complicated for adults. It's not like finding a lost doll. But it's kind of the same, right? You look, and when you find it, you take really good care of it." The simplicity of the girl's analogy was striking. Robert and Richard exchanged glances, both recognizing the unexpected wisdom in her words. "You know, Mr. Richard," Robert said, "Emily's right. Maybe it's time for you to think more about your personal life. You have so much to offer." "It's complicated, Robert. It's not easy to find someone when you're 42 and set in your ways. But it's not impossible either. And you've changed so much these past few months. Maybe now's the right time for even bigger changes." That night, Richard went home thinking about the conversation. For the first time in years, he seriously considered the possibility of finding someone to share his life with. But how? Where? He'd isolated himself socially for so long that he didn't even know where to start. It was Barbara, his assistant, who inadvertently provided the answer. "Mr. Richard, we received an invitation to the New York Business Association's charity dinner. You usually decline these events, but this year's theme is corporate social responsibility. Given the changes you've been implementing at the company, it might be worth attending." Richard hesitated. Social events had always seemed like a waste of time to him, full of shallow conversations and forced networking. But maybe this was exactly the kind of change he needed to make. "You know what, Barbara, I'll go. Confirm my attendance." "Really?" Barbara couldn't hide her surprise. "May I ask what changed your mind?" "Let's just say I got some very wise advice from a 3-year-old consultant." The charity dinner was scheduled for the following Saturday. Richard, who normally didn't worry much about appearances at social events, decided to put extra effort into his presentation. He bought a new suit, went to the barber, and even considered asking Barbara for etiquette tips. "Mr. Richard," she said, laughing, "you're more nervous about this dinner than you are for meetings with million-dollar investors. It's just that this time I don't quite know what to expect. You'll do just fine. Just be yourself, and talk about the things that truly matter to you. Your work with social responsibility is genuine, and that always impresses people." On the day of the event, before leaving home, Richard did something unusual. He stopped by the building on Maple Street to say goodbye to Emily. He didn't know why, but he felt he needed her approval for this new adventure. "Mr. Richard," Emily ran to greet him when he arrived. "You look so handsome. Are you going somewhere special?" "I'm going to a party, Emily. A grown-up party where I'll meet new people. Is it like the Christmas party you threw for us?" "Similar, but different. At this party, I might meet someone special." The little girl's eyes lit up. "Someone who could become part of our family." "Maybe, sweetheart, maybe. Then you have to tell her about us and about the dolls and how you learned to play." "I will, I promise. And if she's nice, can you bring her here to meet me?" "If she's nice, I definitely will." Emily clapped her hands in delight. "Daddy, Mr. Richard is going to look for a girlfriend at the party. Robert appeared, smiling. Is that true, Mr. Richard? Let's just say I'm going with an open mind to new possibilities. Wonderful, you deserve to be happy. And who knows, maybe you'll meet someone who also likes dolls. Richard laughed, kissed Emily on the forehead, and left for the event with a strange feeling in his chest. For the first time in decades, he was attending a social gathering with genuine hopes of meeting someone special. The charity dinner was being held at a 5-star hotel in Soho. When Richard arrived, the hall was already full of business people, professionals and those involved in social causes. He took a glass of wine and began mingling, observing the crowd and trying to spot someone he'd like to talk to. That's when he heard a woman's voice animatedly discussing early childhood education with a small group. The problem is that many public daycares lack the proper structure for children's emotional development. They focus only on the basics, food and hygiene. But children need stimulation, affection, individualized attention. The woman speaking was around 35, with brown hair tied in an elegant bun, wearing a simple but well-tailored navy blue dress. There was genuine passion in her voice when she spoke about children. Richard approached the group. Excuse the interruption. I couldn't help overhearing your conversation about early education. It's a topic very close to my heart. The woman turned to him, revealing intelligent brown eyes and a warm smile. How wonderful. It's not often we meet business people interested in pedagogy. I'm Helen Parker, Director of Hope Village Daycare. Richard Coleman. Pleasure to meet you, Helen. They talked for over an hour about education, child development, and the importance of emotional care in early childhood. Richard learned that Helen ran a daycare in an underserved community on the south side, serving mostly children of single working mothers. It's challenging work, Helen shared, but incredibly rewarding. Some of these children come to us with deep emotional needs. It's amazing to see how a little attention and love can transform a child. Do you have children? Richard asked. I don't have children of my own, but I consider every child at the daycare as if they were mine. I've worked there for 10 years, and I've seen many generations pass through our school. And why did you choose this path? I lost my mother when I was 5 years old, Helen replied with ease. I was raised by my grandmother, who always said that children without mothers need to find other sources of love and care. I decided I wanted to be that source for other children. Helen's story echoed Emily's situation in a striking way. Richard felt an immediate connection with this woman who had dedicated her life to caring for children who, like Emily, had lost their mothers early. Helen, may I tell you a story? Of course. Richard told her about his friendship with the Miller family, about how Emily had changed his perspective on life, about the lessons he'd learned playing dolls with a 3-year-old girl. Helen listened with genuine attention, asking thoughtful questions and showing deep understanding of the emotional dynamics involved. That's a beautiful story, Richard, and rare. Few adults allow themselves to learn from children the way you did. It was transformative for me. It completely changed how I see business and life. I'd love to meet this special little girl. From your description, she seems to have remarkable emotional maturity for her age. I'd be happy to introduce you. I'm sure you'd get along wonderfully. They talked until the end of the event. When they finally said goodbye, they had already made plans to meet again the following weekend. Richard left the dinner with a sense of fulfillment he hadn't felt in years. He had found someone who not only shared his values, but also understood the importance of children in his life. Helen was exactly the kind of person who could naturally become part of the extended family he had formed with Robert and Emily. On Sunday, when Richard brought Helen to meet the Miller family, the reaction was even better than he had hoped. Emily, initially shy, quickly warmed up when she realized Helen was genuinely interested in her dolls and stories. Do you work with children? Emily asked after Helen sat on the floor to play with her. Yes, I work at a school with many children your age. So you know about dolls? A little. Will you teach me? From that moment on, Emily embraced Helen as a new confidant. She showed her all her dolls, told her their stories, and explained the rules of their games with the same seriousness she had once taught Richard months earlier. Robert, watching the interaction, whispered to Richard, "Seems like you've found the right person. Emily doesn't open up like this to just anyone." It's a strange feeling, Richard admitted. For the first time in my life, I feel like I've met someone who understands not just who I am, but who I've become. And who have you become? Richard looked at Emily and Helen playing together, at Robert smiling as he watched them, at this little family that had formed so naturally and unexpectedly. I've become someone who understands that true wealth isn't in what you accumulate, but in what you share. The following months brought deep happiness for everyone involved. Richard and Helen built a strong relationship, grounded in shared values and genuine mutual admiration. Helen became a constant presence in the Millers' lives, offering Emily not just friendship, but also an additional maternal figure. Robert continued thriving in his partnership with Charles, and their financial stability allowed him and Emily to move to a larger apartment in the same building. It was a 2-bedroom apartment, where Emily finally had her own space for her dolls and where Robert could receive visitors more comfortably. Emily, now 4 years old, had become an even more articulate and affectionate child. Her friendship with Helen deepened, and she often asked to visit the daycare where Helen worked. "Mr. Richard," she said during one of those visits, "Helen takes care of the kids just like you took care of us." "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "She helps when the children are sad, plays with them when they're alone, and makes everyone feel special, just like you did with me and Daddy." Richard realized Emily had identified the behavioral pattern that connected him and Helen, the ability to offer genuine care and attention to those who needed it most. It was during one of these reflections that Richard made the most important decision of his life. On a Saturday afternoon, while with Helen, Robert, and Emily in the Miller family apartment, he made an announcement that surprised everyone. "Everyone, I have something important to tell you." They all turned to him, curious. "Helen and I have been talking about our future plans, and we've made a decision." Emily held her breath as if sensing something important was about to be revealed. "We've decided to get married." The reaction was immediate. Emily squealed with joy and jumped into Richard's arms. Robert smiled broadly and congratulated the couple. Helen, radiant, received hugs and kisses of congratulations. "But that's not all," Richard continued. "Helen and I want to become a real family, and a real family will include both of you." Robert's eyes widened. "What do you mean, Mr. Richard? We want you to come live with us. We're buying a big house with a garden where there'll be room for everyone. Emily can have the bedroom of her dreams for her and her dolls. You'll have your privacy, and we can all be together as the family we already are in our hearts." Emily began to cry with happiness. "Just like in my drawing, the big house with a garden for our whole family." Robert was visibly moved. "Mr. Richard, Helen, are you sure about this? It's such a big responsibility." "Robert." Helen said, "Family isn't a responsibility, it's a choice, and we've chosen you." "Besides," Richard added, "you're much more than a friend to me. You're the brother I never had. And Emily is, well, Emily is the daughter I never knew I wanted." Robert's tears were pure gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you." "No need to thank us," Emily said, wiping her own tears. "Family doesn't thank. Family just loves." The wisdom of the 4-year-old once again left all the adults speechless. The preparations for the wedding and the move consumed the following months. Richard and Helen found the perfect house in a quiet neighborhood, a single-story home with 4 bedrooms, a large garden, and enough space for everyone to have privacy and shared areas. Emily actively participated in the preparations, giving her opinions on her bedroom decor and insisting that the dolls should have a special corner in the living room to welcome guests. Robert, initially hesitant to accept so much generosity, gradually allowed himself to dream of the future unfolding before him. His partnership in Charles's company continued to thrive, and he had taken on even greater responsibilities in managing the business. The wedding was celebrated in a simple but deeply emotional ceremony. It took place in the garden of the new house, with only their closest friends present. Charles and Mrs. Martha were the witnesses, and Emily was the flower girl, carrying the rings on a small pink pillow she had chosen herself. But the most moving moment of the ceremony was when Richard gave an impromptu speech. "Helen, when I met you, I thought I was just finding a companion for my life. I didn't know I was also finding the mother my chosen daughter needed, and The sister-in-law my chosen brother deserved. He turned to Robert and Emily. Robert, Emily, you came into my life when I needed to learn the most about love, family, and what truly matters. Today we're not just celebrating a wedding. We're celebrating the official formation of a family that already existed in our hearts. Emily, who had been holding her doll Lucy throughout the speech, let go of Robert's hand and ran to hug Richard. "Now you're my real daddy," she exclaimed with the naturalness of children. Not a single dry eye remained in the small gathering. The honeymoon was spent right at home, all together, arranging rooms, organizing belongings, and creating memories in the spaces they now shared. Emily was overjoyed with her new bedroom, which had a little house-shaped bed, shelves for all her dolls, and a small table where she could draw and play. But what moved her most was being able to move freely through the house, knowing there would always be someone ready to play, talk, or simply give her a hug. Robert adapted quickly to the new family dynamic. His experience as a single father had given him the maturity to understand that family isn't just about blood. It's about choice, care, and mutual commitment. Helen, with her experience caring for children, brought a loving order to the home and special attention to Emily's emotional needs. The little girl finally had a present mother figure, something Richard realized she had missed more than he'd ever imagined. But the biggest transformation was in Richard himself. The man who once considered family nothing more than a distraction from business now structured his schedule around Emily's routines, family activities, and the moments of togetherness he had discovered were the most valuable part of his days. 6 months after the wedding, on a Sunday afternoon, the family gathered in the garden. Helen helped Emily plant flowers in a little corner they had set aside as the doll garden. Robert cleaned the grill, preparing for lunch. Richard watched, the scene from a rocking chair they'd placed on the porch. "Daddy," Emily said, approaching with dirt on her hands and a smile on her face, "are you happy?" "Very happy, sweetheart. Why?" "Because you have the same face I do when I get a new doll," Richard laughed. "You know why I have this face, Emily?" "Why?" "Because you all are the best gifts I've ever gotten in my life." Emily climbed onto Richard's lap, getting him dirty with soil, but he didn't mind. "Daddy, can I tell you a secret?" "Of course. I always ask my mommy in heaven to send someone to take care of me and Daddy Robert. I think she sent you and Mommy, Helen." Richard felt his eyes fill with tears. He hugged Emily tightly, realizing that in her perspective, their entire meeting had been orchestrated by her late mother as a way to keep caring for the family she'd left behind. "I think your mommy is very special up there, Emily." "She is. And now she's happy because we're..." "Happy?" Helen approached, catching the end of the conversation. "Can I join you?" Emily stretched her arms toward Helen, who sat on the arm of the chair. Robert, sensing the moment, came over too, resting a hand on Richard's shoulder. There in that garden on that Sunday afternoon, the family born from a simple gesture, a child offering her doll to comfort a sad man, was now complete and happy. Richard thought of all the paths his life could have taken. He could have simply delivered the eviction notice that day nearly 2 years ago. He could have kept his business-like coldness and stayed focused solely on profits. He could have missed the chance to know true love in all its forms, paternal, fraternal, marital. But a 3-year-old girl with her purity and generosity had changed everything. She had taught him that true wealth wasn't in the properties he owned, the cars he drove, or the bank accounts he maintained. It was in the ability to love and be loved, to care and be cared for, to make a difference in other people's lives. As the sun set over the garden of the home where they now lived as a real family, Richard made a silent promise. He would never forget the lesson Emily had taught him that first day when she offered her only doll to comfort him. The purest gesture in the world had been the seed of everything that followed. And it had all started with a simple phrase, "Mister, do you want to play with Lucy? When I'm sad, she always makes me feel better." End of story. Tell us what you thought of this story in the comments. Do you believe small gestures can truly transform lives? Do you know a similar story? Share your thoughts, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories like this one.